Today, for our vocabulary read aloud, we will be reading Cinderella Stories. As we read, I will be pausing to ask questions. You can pause the video as you write down your answer in your reader response journal or discuss it with an adult, and then push play again when you're ready to continue on. Before we begin, let's review our vocabulary words that we will be listening for. Task, glimmering, served, worn, concealed, content, overjoyed, and valuable. Be listening for your words, and when you hear them, repeat them back to me. Cinderella Stories. Did you know that the Cinderella you often see in movies is not the only one? It's amazing. There are over 700 Cinderella stories. Each story is a little different from the others. The earliest versions were told more than 2,000 years ago. Today, you can find Cinderella stories in books, movies, musicals, and on TV. Let's pause for our first question. What is the main topic of the selection? Push pause while you write your answer and push play when you're ready to continue. Each version of the Cinderella story has details that make sense for the time and place the story was first told. For example, Charles Perrault is the author of the Cinderella story most of us know today. He wrote his Cinderella story to suit people living in France during the 1600s. It is full of many things we do not find in our world today. For example, it has coaches pulled by teams of horses, grand balls, princes, and princesses. Let's pause for a second question. What is the focus of paragraph 2? Push pause, and when you're ready to begin again, push play. This last paragraph we read discussed how Charles Perrault, the author of the Cinderella we're used to hearing, wrote his during the 1600s in France. That is why they have coaches pulled by teams of horses. What would be a fancy ride we would ride in today that might take us someplace special? I can think of maybe of a limousine. So if we were writing a Cinderella of today, instead of a coach pulled by horses, Cinderella might be riding in a limousine. They talk about grand balls, those fancy dresses, or the fancy dance that Cinderella went to. What is the fancy dance that we might think of today? Maybe the prom? There are princes and princesses in Cinderella, which may be appropriate to France in the 1600s. But do we have princes and princesses here? What might we use instead of those characters that would be appropriate for today? Let's continue on with our story. In some modern versions of the story, the sisters might be heading for a prom instead of a ball. The main character might be a boy who has to mow the lawn instead of a girl who has to sweep out the fireplace. Authors can make all kinds of changes from the traditional story and still share the same theme and ideas. There are versions of the Cinderella story from all over the world. Maybe there are so many because each story held special meaning for the people living in that place. As a result, the differences between the stories show what was important to the tellers and the listeners. Maybe some listeners were worried about getting enough food or money, while others cared more about beauty. Let's compare Charles Perrault's Cinderella to another story, Little One Eye, Little Two Eyes, Little Three Eyes. In Cinderella, her father remarries an unkind woman with two unkind daughters. They are mean to Cinderella. They give her task after task to do, so her work is never done. Her clothes are so worn they look like rags. In Little One Eye, a mother has three daughters. The first has one eye, the second has two eyes, and the third has three eyes. Little Two Eyes' sisters are mean to her because she looks like everyone else. Cinderella is not content to stay at home while her stepsisters go to the ball. A fairy godmother appears. She changes a pumpkin into a coach and Cinderella's rags into a beautiful gown, complete with a pair of glimmering glass slippers. In Two Eyes cries for food. A woman tells her to wish on her goat. When she does, a feast is served. Cinderella leaves one glass slipper at the ball by mistake. The prince tries to find the owner of the slipper. He finds Cinderella when she fits one slipper on her foot and takes the other out from where she has concealed it. The prince is overjoyed to find her. In Little Two Eyes ends up with a silver tree. Only she can pick the valuable fruit. The prince marries Cinderella. She forgives her stepsisters. While in the other story, a prince marries Little Two Eyes and she forgives her sisters too. Now, that was a lot of comparison between Cinderella and the other story, Little One Eye, Little Two Eyes, and Little Three Eyes. Think about what we just heard. What is the same and what is different about Cinderella and Little One Eye, Little Two Eyes, Little Three Eyes? When you're ready, push play to finish our story. People are still making up new Cinderella stories today. Maybe you'll be the next person to write one. Our final question for this is, what lesson can be learned from Cinderella stories? When you're finished, friends, I want you to stop and think. This week we're going to be reading a Cinderella story. I want you to think about what we just heard about Cinderella and what we heard about Little One Eye, Little Two Eyes, and Little Three Eyes. See if you can compare and contrast these stories this week. Great job listening.